Hey everyone, it's Saoirse. Since we talked about the Paris review in my last video, I figured we would do a video kind of giving a pretty simple overview of this spring 2023 edition. I read it pretty quick, but also absorbed it, took my time with it, if that makes sense. Kind of like one story a day. There aren't that many stories in here, so it's a collection that this one has 5 short stories, 3 interviews, 1 with a poet, 2 with writers of fiction, 9 poems, and 2 collections of art. So you really get to experience a lot of different types of creativity in here, and I really appreciated the interviews, which I didn't expect to, or didn't really have kind of a preconceived notion of what I would think about the interviews, but I found them very useful. It's like listening to writers talk about their writing is almost as interesting as reading their writing sometimes. Yeah, just any kind of creative person, to get inside that type of brain is pretty fascinating. And I enjoyed most of this. I really sunk my teeth into it and felt so inspired the whole time that I was reading it. I would read a story and then go like brew on some poems and scribble some things, and I was doing more writing in the past week than I typically would. I think because I'm so inspired by this. And I'm still reading Dune, Heretics of Dune. I'll get there. But for right now, what my brain needed was something a little different, and this did that for me. So I'll tell you a quick overview of the short stories in here, and some quotes I liked, and then I'll tell you a few quotes from the interviews, and then a poem or two, and yeah, we'll try to not take too long here. Let's see, the first story is This Is Everything There Will Ever Be by Rivers Solomon. And in this story there's a woman named Julius who goes to AA, and she, throughout this story, just experiences one extreme loss after the next. It's a sad story. I mean, I kind of think most literary stories are sad. If you can tell me some that are really happy, like famous literary fiction that's happy, I'd be interested, actually. Though, of course, as you know if you watch my channel, I prefer the depressing stuff. So a couple quotes from here. She's at this party, and she didn't realize that it was kind of like an open mic type party. None of her insights were things that hadn't been said many times before, but it was the first time they'd been said in that room with that exact group of people, and that situation would never happen again. And it occurred to her that was something not so boring. That moment, that unique moment, would end, like all things did. And most of the time that made things feel meaningless, but earlier that day it had made things feel inconceivably precious. Everything was so heartbreaking. I just really loved that idea that I don't think we think about enough. That, you know, we feel like, especially if you're a creative person, that nothing that you can say is new. It's all been said before, it's all been done before, it's not interesting. Well, every single moment in history is unique. It has never happened before, and it will never happen again. And this idea of being in a room and saying something to a group of people in a certain way, in this order of words, it'll never happen again. I mean, it would be pretty wild to have the exact same room, the exact same people in the room, and read the exact same words. I mean, even if you're like a touring writer and you're doing readings, you're in different rooms with different people. So these are unique moments, and I like this idea of each of those moments being very, very precious. And then this line here I liked. His death brought on one of the bigger depressions of her life, which perhaps was unfair to say since most periods of her life could be characterized as one of the bigger depressions of her life. that just felt like something that I've thought about myself, so it hit home a little hard. And then we'll go on to Sanctuary by Elisa Gonzalez. And I might have to say that this one was my favorite, even though as I was reading it, I don't think I was really having a visceral reaction, but it has just stuck with me and sat in my brain since I read it. And that's a sign of something really well done by a writer. If they can craft a story that does this sort of slow creep into your subconscious, that's impressive. Okay, so this story is about a 14-year-old girl who babysits for a family on vacation. So they bring her on their vacation to watch the two kids. And these two parents, they are like born-again Christians. And this girl comes from a religious family. And throughout the story, the babysitter becomes sort of weirdly close to the dad, who is encouraging her reading. They talk about Anna Karenina, and there's just a weird vibe. There's just, you know how I love a weird vibe that is kind of inexplicable. Let's see. And it's like I didn't even tab that many things in this story, because, you know, when I read, I usually am reading like on a sentence level. I'm very obsessed with the craft of sentences. How are these people pulling their words together to invoke a certain feeling, or even just a certain rhythm of language? In here, it wasn't that. It was just the overarching sort of vibe, which honestly is a lot like Murakami, because when I read Murakami, I'm not tabbing almost anything, you know, based on a sentence level, especially because it's translated, it's hard. But his stories have that kind of like overarching, creeping weirdness, where you just feel something and you almost can't even name it, which I just think is really skillful. So here the father is talking about his wife. You wouldn't be able to tell now, but Sylvia was a bonfire all on her own, obsessed with her poetry and me, he said. It was exhausting, and I did the adultery part a couple of times. I was a dick. For a while she was really depressed. Never tried to kill herself or anything. She's not capable of harming herself. I did know that. Too beautiful. Too much respect for the object. It was just a weird way to hear a husband talk about his wife. You know, it just makes you question so many things. This story, is this a loving couple? Is this a horrible man? Is there some sort of gray area where we can't say whether he's horrible or not? I don't know. And then this last paragraph is what sort of stuck with me. Because I love a story that is a slow burn and then comes to a head with some sort of a climax that, you know, I don't know if that's cliche or if that's just what stories are, but I love that. Slow burn into suddenly there's calamity, even if it's not a big one. It can be like an internal struggle. And those are big. He stood. He would leave. He was leaving. Sylvia's hands pressed down like the sun, and Natalia didn't know if she splashed out from under them or if she simply imagined that she spoke at last, that she cried out to stop him, that she said she would be fine if he'd just stay, because his hands were so wonderfully cold, if he'd wait for her to fall asleep, or better yet, if he'd wait with her all night so she didn't die in her sleep, a real possibility, though not for the reasons he thought, so that when morning on the 10th and last day finally broke, he would prod her awake in the richness of dawn and explain the rotation of the earth and the sun in this world of his creation, explain how she fit, how she was good, how the ones mislaid are found, explain how normal it was to feel so much and how all her feelings were permissible, as all words were permissible, even shit, fuck, Jesus Christ. I love that ending, because they had talked throughout about, you know, you can't curse and you can't take the Lord's name in vain, all this, because they're so religious. And she just seems to be having this sort of crisis moment at the end, and this is brought on by heat stroke. Just really, really nice work. The next one is called Same Same by Elaine Feeney. And this one is about a woman in Ireland who visits her ex-boyfriend. And it includes, mentions of phones and texting and leaving him unread. And it's interesting to see that in writing because I feel like we pretend so much, especially in like highbrow literature, that sort of thing doesn't exist. Like, we don't live in the modern world. It's still like the 1940s or something. But no, we all are glued to phones all the time, and this is how we connect and distract and spend our lives. So yeah, I like that kind of real element to it. Even though usually I am more into the ridiculous notion that we don't have technology. I do prefer that, but yeah, it was just refreshing in here to see it done differently. I can't remember what I was gonna say. I don't know, it's just kind of a painful one because relationships, it's hard to think about going back and seeing an ex again. I have no interest in that. I don't know why people do it, but everyone has their reasons. But that was an interesting look at that. And all these stories, I want to say, all these stories are extremely literary. And when I say that, I mean, not a whole lot has to happen. It is just, it's the human condition playing out in a story. Literary fiction is fiction that doesn't really need a whole lot of plot. It is often more character-driven, and that's what I'm quite drawn to. I did notice in all of these stories that they are third person, which kind of bums me out, because I know that people have such strong opinions about how first person isn't really, like, literary enough, that it's cliche and less skillful to write first person. I just don't agree with that, and that's not just because I like writing first person. I just, my favorite books are first person narratives, my favorite books, and they're classics, and it just kind of bummed me out that not a single story in here was first person. I would have liked a little more variety. Anyway, the next story is A Case Study, and that is by Daniel Mason. This one was very cool. It's about a man who is seeing a therapist when he's kind of at the beginning of med school and needs to talk to someone because he's suddenly in a dark place that he's not used to being in. So he sees this therapist for a while, but then he has to move for his work, and life goes on, and years later, he gets a call from this therapist asking if he can include his case study in his new book. And he really wrestles with this decision, but agrees to it, and then cannot bring himself to read the book when it's published. And I don't know, it's kind of ambiguous in this story. What exactly happens? But let's just look at a couple of quotes. This is after he goes to therapy. It says, walking back across the park along the fog-laced paths, he felt as if he had both left something in the office and taken something with him. This puzzled him. The world was the same. There had been, of course, no change to the complex series of events that he believed had brought the darkness on. The only difference between the moments of his coming and his going was that an hour earlier there had been an emptiness that only he could touch, and now another person knew that it was there. And that's one of the great things about therapy and why it's so beneficial, why I recommend it. There are so many dark, horrible thoughts that torment us all day, and to be able to get those out of our brain and into the air and into somebody else's ears, somebody who hopefully is trained and skilled enough to take them and analyze them and repeat them to us in a way that takes their power away, that's very, very valuable. So I like the way that he stated that in here. So at the end of the story, he finally decides, when his daughter is writing a paper that uses this book that the therapist had written, he decides, okay, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read the part where he talks about my case study. He's just terrified to see himself in this, to see his sessions be written down. And he's obsessed with the idea of people he knows reading this book and maybe realizing that it's him. But he looks through it and he can't find his case study in there. All the names are changed, but he's saying none of these people are me. Nothing, no one familiar. And again, he looked through the stories, feeling at once relief, embarrassment over all his worries, and then increasingly a different reckoning for what had happened. Was he simply unrecognizable to himself? Or had the psychologist, true to his promise, hidden him in layers of anonymity? Or was it even simpler? Had the older man, editing his final manuscript, decided to leave him out? Dawn was breaking outside. His wife, an early riser, would soon be down for breakfast, but he stayed in his chair at the little table and once again began to read the book, seeking in its pages a person who was no longer there. I love this ending, because I'm not sure what we're supposed to get from it. This sentence, was he simply unrecognizable to himself? That is a stunning sentence, because it is so possible that the way that somebody else interprets our existence and our problems might be completely unrecognizable to us. We might see that and not see ourselves in it, and how scary is that idea that other people can see us in a way that we would not see and recognize ourselves at all. The way that we interpret other people is just never fully accurate, and that's kind of a theme in more than one of these stories. And then also, am I just so boring? Am I so boring that he left me out? There's just this real mental struggle in this story that I think is really well done there, and in such a short story. The last one is Irreproachable by Marie Indier. I don't know how to say it, sorry. This one is translated from French, and I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed a lot of the stuff that she was doing in here. It's about a woman who she hires a housekeeper and then takes on this housekeeper's immigration case. She really wants to help her, and she only hires her because she wants to help her. She doesn't need a housekeeper at all, and she feels this kind of hostility from the housekeeper, and it's just really well narrated. Even though you just don't know why there is such a strange vibe between these women. You know, why is there any hostility when she's trying to help her? And at the same time, the main character is also working on this like murder trial. Like, I think is she a lawyer? I can't remember, but there's this strange other bit of this story that I wish was like more resolved, but also that's the point, is that it doesn't matter. Like, maybe that's not the story for us to know about the murder trial. I don't know, or maybe I just don't get it, but I really liked it, so that's good enough for me. I'll read a couple quotes. Because the face Sharon showed her was never anything but placid, and her heart would beat softly, almost imperceptibly, when Maître Suzanne embraced her, her savage heart vainly trying to rile Sharon's, to fill it with her own fervor and revolt. But why? I love this idea of hugging somebody and their heart beating in such a way that you think it's trying to rile you and to fill you with their fervor and revolt, but you don't understand why. She's reading so much into even her heartbeat. It's wonderful. And And then she's thinking, you know, she has such benevolent feelings for this housekeeper, and she just wants her to like her and understand that she's on her side. She thinks, I work for you, Sharon. I will never inflict the slightest unpleasantness on you, and I will never give you an order, said Maître Suzanne mutely, hoping those charitable, unrestrained, ardent thoughts would stream out from her mind like eggs into a spawning bed, where Sharon's own thoughts, her unknowable emotions, would bond with Maître Suzanne's silent declarations, and she would perhaps feel hope, the result of an immaculate, unspoken fusion of fear and trust. Love that description of people communicating without words, and possibly not communicating at all because only one of them realizes that it's happening. Okay, now let's look at a few quotes from the interviews. I liked this one with Mary Gateskill. Let's see. She says, I've sometimes had my students try an exercise where they narrate an episode from their life in which they feel mistreated by someone or had a conflict with them from the perspective of that other person. You pick something that happened a while ago, at least a year ideally, because your emotions won't be as hot. It's remarkable how many of them really can't do it. They're still portraying the other person as an asshole. It's hard to sincerely occupy feelings that are fully oppositional to yours, to be able to look at yourself from that other position and think, what a twit. That's an interesting exercise to do as a writer, especially if you want to try and write first person and not basically write your own story, because there's nothing wrong with that. I deeply adore autobiographical fiction, but if you're set on writing first person and you don't want it to sound like you, that's a really useful exercise. Music is the only art form I've ever had real envy of. I knew early on I didn't have enough talent to be a painter because it has such a direct physical expression. I've always thought it would feel incredible to channel that energy so immediately into other people's force fields. The response to writers can be strong, but it's not people screaming to touch you and going insane when they see you. It's for the best that I have zero musical talent. I'm sure eventually that attention would start to feel awful, especially if you didn't have great boundaries. I wouldn't have been psychologically equipped. I would have been one of the ones that killed themselves very young. Writing is so much slower, and it penetrates in a very different way. I used to say that writers are frustrated rock stars. Even a musician with the most modest career in some local bar is to me more glamorous than the most glamorous writer. It is a very particular form of art, because I think this all the time. I have musician friends and actor friends and artist friends, and for them it's much easier to show off their creativity, to show off their passion, to give somebody a snippet of it. As a writer, almost no one wants to sit and listen to you read a story or be handed a story and go home and read it. It is so hard to find people with the patience for that, and it's so frustrating, because it's just as valid as music and visual art. But you know, unless somebody's willing to listen to you slam a poem in front of them, then you're kind of stuck in your own artistic world, because a lot of your friends won't be willing to really engage with your work in the way that they would with a musician friend going to their shows, supporting them. That's a lot easier, I think, for people to wrap their brains around. So it can be a very lonely thing, is what I'm saying. Kitten's going crazy. Trying to describe accurately what I'm wanting to say. She's saying that's the hardest thing. So much is happening in any given moment, both internally and externally. So much of life is not about words. Love hearing that from a writer, because it is the most frustrating thing about writing, that our life is not necessarily lived in words, it's lived in images and actions and reactions. And we invented language. I mean, let's be completely honest. Language is an invention of humans. Animals have their languages and all, but you know what I mean. Verbal language, all these ridiculous letters and sounds and words that we made up, and grammar rules. It is so silly, but it is so crucial and beautiful, because we keep trying to make it mean something. And that's writing. We're just trying to make our language mean something. I also liked this interview with Rita Dove, and I'd never heard of any of the writers in this before, but I really liked what she had to say about poetry. And here in the beginning, when the interviewer is introducing her, he says, her sense of humor, never enough commented on, was in full force, as was her training both as an opera singer and, more recently, a ballroom dancer. Her carriage, as ever, was impeccable, her work woven through with jazz, with the pleasures and silences of language. I love hearing about a writer who has so many other passions, other hobbies, things that they fill their life with, and she makes it very clear that these things inform and inspire her poetry. I mean, that's what it always comes down to. If you're a writer, if you're somebody inclined to use language to communicate your creativity, you're going to be inspired by everything that you do. Everything's going to go into your brain and turn into words that you are going to put into sentences that you hope will convey this passion that you have. So, as somebody who I call myself a jack of all trades and a master of none, I liked hearing that she has so many interests as well, because these people who are just singular people where I'm just a writer and I don't do or think about anything else. I eat writing for breakfast. I don't relate to that, you know. I love fitness and watching sunrises and what else do I love? Eating. I love cooking, baking. I love antiques. You know, I love the Titanic. So I've got a lot of other things other than writing, but all of these things that I love kind of go into my writing, which is fine with me. So let's read a couple things from her. She has this great line. One does not look the muse in the eye and say, forget it. That I read that, and there are certain sentences that just bowl you over because they speak a kind of truth that you've been avoiding, maybe, subconsciously. When she says, one does not look the muse in the eye and say, forget it. I just stopped. And I thought of all the times that I did that I was inspired and decided, even if it didn't feel like a decision, I decided not to write. Not to write what was on my heart, in my mind, and just went about the rest of the day without getting those feelings out into words. So I just thought that was a very important and concise thing that she said. I'm a firm believer in tricking myself as I write. Bad confessional poetry has always raised my hackles because it goes skewering in deep, exclaiming, "Oh, look at all this blood." But I'm like, no one's interested in your blood. Make me bleed as I'm reading. That is what we all want to do, right? As writers, we want to make the reader bleed. Now, I love confessional poetry and confessional memoir, fiction, whatever it is. But I see what she's saying here. It is this perfect balance to be able to strike that if you can bleed at the same time that you're making the reader bleed, that's the goal. Okay, and then the last interview, oh, I'm going longer than I thought I was going to, is Olga Tokarczuk. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it. Let's see, I've got one quote from her. She says, my energy, or the interview is asking, how do you know it's ready? How do you know your writing's ready? My energy simply runs dry. An urge exhausts itself. In that regard, writing resembles hunger or lust. You could eat one more bite or write one more chapter, but you no longer feel like it. To use the language of my university training, the process feels biological or psychosomatic, like an act of reproduction or of discharge. Just as after you give birth, you rapidly forget the pain involved. You easily overlook the effort that's gone into composing a novel once it's complete. but it's an immense strain on the body. Above all, so much labor goes into maintaining your concentration. I also liked what she said about her routine. Everybody wants to know about a writer's routine. When do you write? Because I think we, not me, but people ask this and are so obsessed with this question because we want to believe that writers are like otherworldly people, and we couldn't possibly do what they do because it just comes from some inexplicable place of inspiration. But we keep asking, you know, is it like the time of day that you sit down? Is it how many hours you spend? Are you writing longhand? Do you have an outline before you start a novel? All this stuff trying to make sense of a creative process. And she says that she doesn't have this really strict routine, and I liked that because I will write when inspiration strikes. I don't typically force myself to write. Okay. Then I will just read you one poem and a bit from another one. Okay, I really like this one. It's called John Wick is So Tired by Kira Wilder. Interesting title, right? John Wick is so tired, but he can still throw a hatchet and hit a guy dead in the face. He can just split other people open with anything, with a pencil, because he knows what it's like. Because he's tired and loves dogs, and he's cracked right open too, and I want to tell you to look at his feet when he runs, the way they turn so delicately in, the way they're listing slightly, his black shoes, the heels of them, their heartbreaking glissade hush-hushing across the hotel tiles. Just look at the way he's slipping. Even before he soaks the floor with other people's blood, I want to do push-ups like John Wick does in the morning, so I won't just be sad, but sad and also ripped, like sad with muscles that stand out all obvious in desolate relief, sad where it looks like I eat clean and have expensive taste. I want to be sad but with a cut six-pack, and to drink thimblefuls of espresso out of impeccable cups, and I want to tell you to wait and be here and look at me, and also at the way John Wick is leaning into those people that he's stabbing, how he gets so close to them and just holds them for a second, how he's so tired but he knows he has to let them go, and I wish you would be here, and we could watch John Wick together. And we could put our ruthless arms around each other, and if we looked out the window, it would be all California, and I would lean in close and tell you that John Wick kills women like he's read feminist theory, which is to say I think he's familiar with the philosophy of care, and you would laugh, and wait, look now, John Wick is riding that black horse like he knows just what grief is, like he knows something it's killing, and sometimes it's just slipping in your shoes. And I want you to be here, and wait, now the camera's right on him, just all cool colors and diaphanous mood, and it looks like his hand hurts, like his knuckles are a little swollen, but he's not saying it, and I want you to know what you think of all that blue light. I've never seen John Wick. I don't know why this resonated with me so much. I especially really liked the line about I want to be sad, but also ripped, sad with muscles that stand out all obvious in desolate relief. Can relate, you know. Yeah, I'm like, if I'm gonna be sad and depressed, I might as well work out and be jacked. And yeah, the gym is one of my peaceful places. What I get out of this, and this is the whole thing about poetry, I am not, like, yes, I have a degree in writing, but I don't consider myself an academic, and I just don't really want to hang with those people because, I don't know, unless they can be more open, they can sometimes be kind of closed off in their points of view. Anyway, quickly, what I get out of it is, like, we pull meaning from everything that we see, and if it seems like the narrator is missing somebody and wants to watch this movie with them, and even this movie is making them think of them, because when you miss somebody, every single thing will make you think of them. I would say more, but I actually have to get going. I'm going to see the new Little Mermaid movie. So I'll just read you the first bit of this poem by Malachi Black, holding a book I haven't read for many years. I lived once in a burned-out Ford sedan. I knew only the make, its ornament stood bald and undaunted on the hood, but its word, the block script of its model, had been pried off by the junkyard hands of a drunk vandal, or perhaps just lost to dirty weather and the rising hunger of a purifying flame. I knew this as I myself had first been made, and then remade by the raw force of the elements, my name spoken and sung until it was a claim broken and spun like the clear web of a spider hanging from the rear-view mirror of a burned-out Ford sedan. When I read a poem that is so rhythmic, sometimes I'll start reading it out in my head, and then reading it in my head, and then I have to read it out loud because it's just like, ooh, it's taking me. I'm going with this rhythm, and this internal rhyme here, my name spoken and sung until it was a claim broken and spun like the clear web of a spider. Oh, chef's kiss. I absolutely adore internal rhyme. And it's like, I don't see, maybe I'm not well versed in this, haha, verse poetry, but I don't see a specific rhyme scheme or rule of poetry throughout this poem. There's some rhyming, and it doesn't seem to come at like specific times. And maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right, that's the kind of poetry I love, and that I also love to write. That the rhymes just happen when they happen, and the rhythm happens in the way that I don't know, like the way that your brain is processing this. Usually it's a hurt. I think a lot of poetry is about hurt. And the way that you process that doesn't really happen in clean lines that follow rules, like sonnets. Nothing against sonnets, but like, I don't think there should be so many rules all the time. If you write free verse, your writing is so valid, and I'm proud of you. So then we have like some art. I'm not gonna look at too much, but you know, as you can see, it's like glossier pages, and there's a couple of collections in here. Visual art is admittedly my least favorite of all the arts. Isn't that strange? Unless you're talking about furniture. I love looking at furniture. It is art. But like two-dimensional, not my thing, typically. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm gonna go watch this movie, and yep, let me know if you've read the Paris Review. This is my first time reading it, and as I said, I feel very inspired. So until next time, happy reading.